Hello and welcome back to Nerd Doc. George Miller's new movie, 3,000 Years of Longing, has finally arrived in theaters, but it can be a little confusing to say the least. This video explains 3,000 Years of Longing to better help you understand exactly what happens in the movie. That means there will be spoilers for the movie in this video. The movie is still in theaters, which means we can only show footage from trailers, so please bear with us there. While we feel we have a good understanding of the film, there are a number of ways to interpret the events of the movie. If you have an alternate explanation or any questions about our explanation of the film, please feel free to leave a comment below. 3,000 Years of Longing follows Alithea, a scholar and narratologist who travels the world collecting stories and myths. She ends up in Istanbul for a conference where she encounters a Djinn, which is basically a genie in a bottle, and their lives are forever changed. There are two primary ways to interpret the events of 3,000 Years of Longing. The easy perspective is that the mystical events in the film all take place inside Alithea's mind. When she was a child, she created an imaginary friend to help cope with her loneliness. The events of the film are an extension of that brought on by her acknowledgement that death is approaching, and the intense feeling of loss that comes along with such acknowledgement. That's the easy way around the events of the movie, so we're going to assume that is not the case. Instead, we're going to run with a different theory that Alithea was destined to meet, fall in love with, and free the Djinn. When she first arrives in Istanbul, she encounters two figures who are related to the Djinn. The first is at the airport when a small man tries to steer her in a specific direction, presumably toward the Djinn, but suddenly disappears when Alithea's friend and colleagues arrive. No one saw this person aside from Alithea. The second time this occurred is when she was giving a lecture and a member of Queen Sheba's court appeared in the audience. Once again, Alithea was the only person who could see the ghostly figure. We know from the second story that Djinn tells Alithea that he is able to reach out to certain people. This is what we believe is happening. The Djinn is able to reach out to Alithea and guide her to the bottle in hopes that she will eventually set him free. However, this isn't the first time he has reached out to her. The imaginary friend she had when she was a child was also the Djinn's attempt to reach out to Alithea. For a Djinn, time doesn't really mean that much. Alithea's imaginary friend continued to be there for her until she essentially closed her mind off to him. This is similar to what happens in the second story. The Djinn makes reference to this when he first meets Alithea. It may not have been the Djinn directly, but at the very least, it was his influence. In the three stories the Djinn tells Alithea, we can see she embodies two of the women the Djinn fell in love with. The first is Sheba, who is a biblical figure who may or may not have actually existed. Most believe the area where Sheba was meant to exist is where Yemen and Ethiopia are located today. Moving past history, we see that Sheba takes a noticeable swallow just as she begins to fall in love with King Solomon. Alithea makes the same gesture just as she begins to fall in love with the Djinn. We also see Zephyr, from the Djinn's final story, who tapped her foot while she was studying. Alithea does the same thing when she's studying on the plane. These are meant to be signs of love and a connection to the Djinn, whether directly or indirectly, at least through the eyes of the Djinn and through the lens of the story. We know Alithea is lonely and has a desire to not only be in love, but for the person she loves to also love her equally. She's been looking for this her entire life, as seen by her imaginary friend when she was a child, and her ex-husband Jack. Alithea loved Jack, but unfortunately he did not feel the same way toward her. He ended up leaving her for another woman, and she filed him away in her basement, similar to how she dealt with her imaginary friend. When she finally makes her first wish, which has to be her heart's desire in order for the Djinn to grant it, she wishes for them to be in love. Not only for her to love him, but for him to love her as well. She's unsure if the Djinn can grant this wish because true love cannot be forced upon someone. However, the Djinn agrees and does everything he can to grant her wish. Alithea places the Djinn in a new bottle and attempts to go through airport security. She doesn't close the lid on the bottle because she doesn't want the Djinn to die, metaphorically. The Djinn mentioned that in short, the closest he can get to death comes from being locked away in the bottle. Because Alithea loves him, she doesn't want him to have that feeling even for a brief moment. This is why she leaves the bottle open, and when it's closed by security, she opens it as soon as she possibly can. We also learn throughout the film that Djinns are electromagnetic in nature. An X-ray machine works by using a penetrating form of high-energy electromagnetic radiation to see through various objects. Alithea is unsure whether or not this will hurt the Djinn and tries to avoid putting the bottle through the X-ray machine. Of course, it doesn't actually hurt the Djinn, but this is foreshadowing what's going to happen when they arrive in England. Now, once they arrive, here's where the film doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Djinn is in pain because of all the television and radio waves that allow him to hear and see everything that's on TV and radio, as well as cell phones and similar devices. It's constant noise to him, and while he attempts to filter it out and just become accustomed to it, he eventually succumbs and nearly drowns in the sheer amount of data and noise. This is when Alithea finds him in the basement, nearly turned to dust, lost in the endless sea of noise. The reason why this doesn't actually make sense is because the Djinn was fine when they were in Turkey. Turkey is a first world country just like England and has a larger population than England. There's no reason to think England has significantly more electromagnetic pollution than Turkey. In fact, it should technically have less. We'll go ahead and put that issue aside and just assume that in the fictional world of the movie, Turkey has far less electromagnetic pollution than England. Anyway, Alithea is so concerned about the love of her life dying, she uses her second wish to force him to speak in his weakened state, then uses her third wish to send him home to the realm of the Djinn so he's free and no longer in pain. Assuming she's lost the Djinn forever, she boxes up his things and puts him away next to her box for Jack, her ex-husband. However, while a Djinn will always outlive a human, he proves his love for Alithea by returning to visit her on multiple occasions. Being in England still causes him pain, and he stays longer than he should every time, but he returns to her and spends as much time as he can with her. Now, why they didn't just travel back to Istanbul for his visits, who knows? Anyway, the Djinn is now free and can do as he pleases, but he chooses to be in pain because he knows it will make her happy. To the Djinn, Alithea was his Sheba and his Zephyr, the love of his life that he would do anything for. You can dive deeper into the meaning of the film by examining each of the stories the Djinn tells Alithea, but it doesn't really offer a more complex understanding of the tale. This is a tale about love, loss, and loneliness. You can dig into the stories, but even with more understanding, those main themes do not change. The Djinn and Alithea are parallels of one another, each feeling love, loss, and loneliness throughout the Djinn's tales and Alithea's life. There are also side themes about how the choices you make can change your life for the better or worse. For instance, in the first story, the Djinn chooses to remain at Sheba's side, which is how he was imprisoned in the first place. This is a parallel to Alithea staying with Jack until he eventually left her. Had she ended up leaving him, knowing his heart wasn't in the relationship, the pain would have been far less. It should also be noted that the movie is based on the short story The Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye. In the short story, Alithea, known as Jillian, also has kids that have long since left home, which adds to her sadness. That aspect was left out of the movie to focus Alithea's sadness primarily on her failed relationship. Similarly, her sadness from acknowledging that death is coming is directly mentioned in the short story, but it's mostly symbolic in the movie. So what are your thoughts on 3,000 Years of Longing? Do you have different theories about the film? Let us know in the comments below. For now, that wraps up this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who loves magical fairy tales.